Welcome to r/DNDStories, where the dice are forever in your favor.
Okay, now we're going to continue on with Session 4 of Naiavita's campaign. This is Zombies and Spiders and Dragons, oh my. And we're going to begin this with a prayer to the departed. We lost Thoril at the end of the last session, and now they are putting him to rest. Rest now, for your journey is at an end. No pain can reach you. You are free. Your spirit soars high on gossamer wings. With your final breath, you kiss the sun. Mourn the loss, but let the weeping cease. May the Earth Mother watch over you, and may you rest in her embrace forever. As we buried Thoril, I took a tuft of feathers from the owlbear and fastened them onto the end of my quarterstaff. I planted it into the ground at the head of the cairn to mark where Thoril drew his last breath. He died, and I just stood there. I know I could have saved him, but hindsight is 20/20. The worst part was, I didn't feel sad. To be perfectly honest, I really didn't feel much of anything. I wandered back to the campsite, plopping down onto a boulder, just in range of the warmth. Demos joined me, having finished ripping out a sizable patch of grass where he had been kneeling. I gave him the closest I could offer to a smile and looked across the fire. Valanthia was staring intently at the fire, but not really. It was clear her gaze was leagues from there. And Othin was holding his spellbook, turning the pages slowly as if making sure he was actually a wizard. Demos opened his mouth and started to speak, but seemed to forget his words and merely shook his head. When he finally spoke, I couldn't even make out what he was saying. All I heard was a dull hum echoing around me, only snapping out of it when he placed a hand on my shoulder. Having no idea what he said, I let out an awkward chuckle and a half-nod. When morning finally came, we didn't even bother making anything to eat. None of us had much of an appetite. We hitched up the wagon and continued north along the high road towards the ruins of Thunder Tree. We hoped to find Rydoth, the druid we were told may have information about the whereabouts of Cragmaw Castle. We were nearing the edge of the river that fed from the sea through the city and into the Neverwinter Wood when we spotted a traveler along the road. A human sporting chainmail and a purple skirt nearly long enough to drag along the ground. She flagged us down and lowered her hood as she approached. Long caramel brown hair fell in curls framing her face, and she smiled ear to ear.
Hey there, I'm Taco. Nice to meet you. Lovely day for traveling, wouldn't you say?
Either she could not sense the misery pouring out of the wagon, or she was simply in too high spirits to care. She walked right up to the wagon and shoved a welcoming hand at our driver.
Yes, a fair day, I suppose,
answered Valanthia, shaking the stranger's hand and eyeing her quizzically.
You're a good way from the city. What brings you all the way out here? Goblins, mostly. I've been trying to recover something, and I've reason to believe a group of them near here may have it.
It was certainly a surprise, as we'd assumed the caravan was a simple raid. But if these were indeed the same goblins, it seemed they had their fingers in a lot of pies. After some deliberation, we decided to invite her to join us. We could use an extra pair of hands, and we had a common goal. She climbed aboard the wagon and sat down. Yawning, she crossed her arms behind her head and reclined back. If only we could all be so relaxed. As night drew nearer, we decided to make camp before reaching the ruins, as it would do us no good traipsing about in the dark. Valanthia took first watch as the rest of us had a short rest. The rest of the evening was uneventful, thank the gods. Come morning, we broke camp and reached the outskirts of Thunder Tree within a few hours. Given how dangerous the area appears to be, Demos opted to stay with the cart. Having a few magic parlor tricks might prove handy should anything come about. The town was a mess. A few crumbling stone walls sat adjacent, having long since stopped functioning as buildings. We approached a dilapidated shack on the north edge near the road into town. Hanging above the warped doorway was a faded wooden sign, and one could barely make out the image of a great horse holding a tankard. An inn, perhaps? The door was closed shut and completely stuck. The ceiling above had caved in enough to hold fast the door. Cautiously, I pressed my ear to the door and listened, but heard nothing. I tried to open the door, but hadn't the strength to force it open. Our newest member smiled at me and gestured to the door.
Be my guest.
She stepped forward, gripped the door handle, and BAM! She slammed her shoulder into the door and broke it straight off its hinges. Angry groans echoed from the house as a group of zombies rose from the floor and shambled towards us. What fun! Taco drew her sword and immediately dove into the nearest zombie, her sword actually piercing the rotting wall behind it, pinning it in place. It growled as it swiped wildly, but couldn't quite reach her. This left her in quite the predicament as the second one closed the distance and slammed against her. I stepped into the doorway and fired an arrow into one of them, but an arrow to the chest did little to hamper their advance. As I knocked another arrow, Othin and Valanthia entered the house and did their best to split the enemies apart from one another. While Othin sent out a spray of flame that drew their attention, Valanthia backed against the wall at the far side of the room. She clasped her hands into a prayer, muttering softly to herself as a dim light began to emanate from her. Her hair and clothing seemed to move in an invisible wind, and she dropped to all fours. Her entire body became awash with silvery smoke. In a flash of light, it cleared, and a great gray wolf dove from the smoke and tackled the zombie, harassing Taco to the ground. She ripped and tore and left the zombie in pieces as Taco pulled her sword free and decapitated her assailant. I didn't want to risk hitting my compatriots with an arrow, so I hurried into the house and rushed past the zombies Othin was busy roasting. A few more were in the next room, and I did my best to cut them down to size. The thing about zombies, they don't like to stay down when you kill them. In fact, they are about as stubborn an opponent as you could ever hope to face. While Valanthia bit into another, Othin sent a bolt of flame into another and put it down for the count. Taco raced into the room with me and took a wide swing with her sword. It managed to relieve the nearest undead of both its arms and rendered it more or less defeated. Another chop split it down the middle and sealed the deal. I did my best to kill the other, but in its flailing, I managed to get my scimitar stuck in its side. It would have gotten hold of me if not for my offhand blade, which I used to remove its grasping limbs. I finally managed to deliver a kick that sent it reeling back onto the floor, where Othin sent a shower of fire raining down and burned it to ashes. We spent the next few minutes composing ourselves, wondering why we can't just have a normal day for once. It was as we stepped back outside when Valanthia stood at attention and began sniffing the air intently. Something had caught her attention, and she followed the scent east toward what looked like the remains of a tower. A few yards from the door lay the remains of a giant spider, its still body covered in a noxious green slime that seemed to burn patches in the grass beneath it. What was it? Acid? Poison? We weren't sure, but we were certain of one thing. The smell was coming from inside the tower. We crept inside, curiosity having far outweighed our self-preservation, and the air was thick with a foul odor. It burned my eyes and nose, and Valanthia pressed her snout to the ground to try and block it out. Just when we were deciding what to do, the decision was made for us. Another door led to the spire, and it was there that the smell was emanating, along with a strange hissing noise. Not like a snake, but heavy and rhythmic. What could possibly be making that noise? Taco tried the door, but of course it was stuck. She managed to press against it while keeping a hold of the handle so as not to fling it open. When it finally did move, it let out a sharp creak as if to mock her efforts. Even from my angle behind her, I could see her turn pale as the blood drained from her face. A young green dragon lay curled up in the tower floor, sleeping soundly amongst the rubble. While only a juvenile, these beasts could still reach heights of up to 10 feet, and we certainly didn't want to disturb it. Taco did her best to close the door more quietly, but another defiant squeak echoed forth and the dragon rustled slightly. Othin took hold of the door whilst Valanthia and I grabbed Taco's arms and all but yanked her back. Othin closed the door and we all stood silently for what felt like ages. When we realized we were still alive, we all heaved a sigh of relief, and we left as quickly and quietly as possible. But our troubles, it seems, were far from over. As we made our way to the southwest corner of town, shaking out clothes to rid ourselves of the most unpleasant smell, all of a sudden Taco stopped dead in her tracks. At first I thought she had stumbled, but when she tried to lift her feet, they refused to move. She turned back slightly, her eyes wide with panic, and we finally noticed the thick strands of webbing she had walked through. Just then, a cacophony of hisses came from a nearby house, and several long, hairy legs crept out from the doorway. The giant spider shrieked and rushed at her. She managed to lift her shield just in time to block the brunt of its attack, but it extended a set of fangs, and one of them hooked over her shield and pierced her left shoulder. She winced in pain, but would not give up. She gripped the shield with her other hand and forced it upwards, knocking the spider back and giving us a clear target. I darted between them and slashed wildly at the beast, sending it skittering backwards and straight into Valanthia, who proceeded to sink her fangs into one of its many legs. It hissed and flailed and tried to shake us off. I used this chance to slice the webbing at Taco's feet and give her some breathing room. Thankfully, the spider hadn't the chance to inject any venom, leaving only a minor wound. Othin prepared to cast a spell when a stream of webbing shot from the roof of a building and covered him from head to toe. A second spider came into view and began to creep down along the webs towards our unfortunate mage, but it had failed to catch his hands. He tugged at the webbing as hard as he could as the arachnid crept ever closer, making a show of clicking its fangs together in anticipation. He managed to get enough room to twirl his hand and throw a spell off towards a group of trees just ahead of us, and from behind the trees came a terrible roar. He hoped the spiders might be as frightened of the dragon as we were, and boy, can that man gamble. Both of them quickly fled back into the house and ran out of sight. Taco wrapped a bandage around her shoulder, while Valanthia and I set out untangling Othin. Just then, he pointed behind us at a small hut. A face could be seen peering out at us before moving out of sight. We approached the hut and knocked on the door.
Hello? Is anyone there?
What? No. Go away. Leave this place. Othin whispered at the door. Whoever you are, please, it's not safe out here, and we're not looking to cause you any trouble. A few moments went by until the voice let out a gruff reply. Fine. Give me a moment. We could hear numerous locks being undone until finally the door swung open and the man hurried us inside. After he secured the door once again, I posted up next to the window to keep watch. A shriveled man with a long white beard, he spoke in a calm but firm tone, clearly anxious about the commotion we caused outside. Valanthia offered a hand, introducing herself and the rest of us, and asked if he knew of someone named Rydoth. Well, that'd be me, I suppose. What can I do for you? He asked, scratching at his beard.
We heard from Kellen Alderleaf that you may be able to help us. We're looking for Cragmaw Castle, as we have reason to believe a group of goblins we've been tracking can be found there.
Oh, is that all? Thank heavens. I thought you might be with those masked loonies on the other side of town.
Apparently, the loonies in question recently began gathering in the town square on the east end of Thunder Tree. The only thing Rydoth could tell us about them is their preferred attire, black robes and masks. Not exactly your average traveler's getup, but we thought it best not to make any more friends today. He also mentioned that the dragon was a new arrival, and he hadn't yet thought of a plan to drive it off. It was certainly out of our league, and we decided to quit while we were breaking even. He marked the castle on our map, and with our thanks, bid us farewell as we hurried back to the wagon. If I never see another spider again, I'll die a reasonably happy elf.
That was r/DNDStories. Now, to my viewers, what scares you more on a primordial level? The giant man-eating spiders? Or a juvenile green dragon?